The sun, a molten coin in the desert sky, cast long shadows across the perfumed gardens of the harem. Maisa knelt by a bed of jasmine, her fingers gently brushing the delicate white blossoms. She hummed a quiet tune, a melody as old as the dunes themselves, as she gathered the fragrant blooms. The other women of the harem, adorned in silks and jewels, strolled through the gardens, their laughter echoing like wind chimes. But their laughter held no joy for Maisa. They called her the Ugly One, their whispers sharp as thorns, their gazes cold as desert nights. Maisa paid them no mind. Her heart found solace in the quiet rustle of leaves, in the earthy scent of the herbs she cultivated. She knew the secrets of each plant, their healing properties, their hidden powers. The pockmarks that marred her skin were a testament to her own healing touch, a reminder of the smallpox she had fought as a child, saving others while scarring herself. She crushed the jasmine blossoms, releasing their sweet perfume, and added them to a mixture of dried chamomile and mint. This tea, she knew, would soothe the Sheikh's headaches, the ones that plagued him after long days spent ruling his tribe. He was a just man, Sheikh Ziyad, known for his fairness and wisdom. Maisa often watched him from afar, admiring his thoughtful gaze, his quiet strength. He seemed different from the other men, uninterested in the glittering displays of the harem. A shrill laugh cut through the air, breaking Maisa's peaceful reverie. Firial, the harem's most celebrated beauty, sauntered towards her, her emerald eyes flashing with malice. "Still playing with weeds, ugly one?" she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You should be grateful we even allow you to breathe the same air as us." Maisa did not reply. She simply continued to prepare her tea, her hands steady and sure. Firial's cruelty was as predictable as the desert sun. She thrived on the misery of others, her beauty a weapon she wielded without mercy. Maisa knew it was best to remain silent, to let Firial's venom wash over her like the desert wind. "Don't think you'll ever catch the Sheikh's eye," Firial continued, her voice laced with a warning. "He deserves a woman of beauty, not a scarred creature like you." She flicked her wrist dismissively and stalked away, her laughter trailing behind her like a poisonous vapor. Maisa sighed, a quiet breath that held no bitterness. She knew her place in the world. She was a shadow in the garden, a whisper in the wind. Her beauty, if she possessed any, was hidden deep within, in the quiet strength of her spirit, in the poetry that bloomed in her heart. And that, she thought, was enough, for her at least. The jasmine tea was ready. She carefully poured it into a silver flask, the fragrant steam swirling around her like a gentle embrace. Perhaps, she thought, a little kindness could bloom even in the harshest desert. The wind whispered secrets across the dunes, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the distant bleating of goats. Sheikh Ziyad sat beneath the awning of his tent, his gaze fixed on the vast expanse of the desert. He felt a familiar weariness settle over him, a heaviness that had nothing to do with the desert heat. He was tired of the endless petitions, the endless flattery, the endless parade of beautiful women presented to him as potential brides. He longed for something more, something deeper than outward appearances and empty promises. His advisers, however, did not share his sentiments. They saw his reluctance to marry as a weakness, a threat to the stability of his tribe. They urged him to choose a wife, a woman of noble birth and striking beauty, a woman who could strengthen his alliances and secure his legacy. Ziyad sighed, the sound lost in the desert wind. He cared little for politics and even less for superficial beauty. He sought a companion, a kindred spirit, a woman of intelligence and compassion. A small brazier burned near the entrance of the tent, filled with fragrant herbs meant to purify the air. Firial, invited to the Sheikh's camp as a gesture of goodwill towards her powerful family, stood near the brazier, her silken robes shimmering in the firelight. She pretended to admire a rare desert plant, its delicate blossoms the color of sunset. With a seemingly careless gesture, she nudged the plant too close to the flames. The dry leaves crackled, and a plume of acrid smoke filled the air. Ziad coughed, his lungs constricting. The smoke, he realized, was not merely unpleasant, it was toxic. He felt a sudden dizziness, a tightness in his chest. Panic rippled through the assembled courtiers. Ferial gasped dramatically, feigning concern. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me! I didn't realize how close the plant was to the fire." As the sheikh struggled to breathe, Mesa, who had accompanied the harem women to the camp, quietly stepped forward. She held out a silver flask, her gaze calm and steady. "My lord," she said, her voice soft but clear, "this tea will ease your discomfort." Ziad, his vision blurring, gratefully accepted the flask. He took a tentative sip, the warm liquid soothing his burning throat. The herbal blend, a mixture of jasmine, chamomile, and a rare desert herb known only to Mesa, quickly began to work its magic. His breathing eased, the dizziness subsided. He looked at Mesa, truly seeing her for the first time. He had noticed her quiet presence in the harem, but he had never truly looked at her, not beyond the scars that marked her face. Now he saw the intelligence in her eyes, the calm strength in her demeanor. "Thank you," he said, his voice still raspy but filled with genuine gratitude. "You have done me a great service." He turned to his advisors, who still hovered around him, their faces etched with concern. "This woman," he said, gesturing towards Mesa, "knows more about healing than all of your physicians combined." He paused, his gaze returning to Mesa. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mesa, my lord," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Ziad nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. He felt a flicker of intrigue, a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. He was curious about this quiet woman, about the knowledge she possessed, about the story hidden behind her scarred face. He had a feeling that Mesa was more than just a harem slave. He had a feeling she was someone extraordinary. Days later, the harem buzzed with anticipation. Sheikh Ziad was visiting, an unusual occurrence. The women preened and fussed, hoping to catch his eye. Epherial, her hand wrapped in a silk bandage, a consequence of her carelessness with the burning plant, she claimed, positioned herself prominently in the courtyard, her emerald eyes fixed on the entrance. Mesa, as usual, remained in the background, tending to her herb garden. She had no illusions about attracting the sheikh's attention. When Ziad entered the courtyard, he bypassed the throng of beautifully adorned women and walked directly towards Mesa. A ripple of surprise went through the harem. Firial's jaw dropped, her carefully crafted smile faltering. Mesa, startled, rose to her feet, her hands nervously clutching her skirt. "Mesa," Ziad said, his voice gentle, "I wanted to thank you again for your help the other day. Your tea, it was remarkable." "It was my duty, my lord," Mesa replied, her gaze lowered. "Duty?" Ziad chuckled. "It was more than duty. It was wisdom, knowledge, skill. Tell me, where did you learn so much about healing herbs?" Mesa hesitated, then began to speak, her voice gaining confidence as she described her childhood in a small village, her grandmother's teachings about the power of plants, her own fascination with the natural world. Ziad listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. He was captivated by her quiet passion, by the depth of knowledge that shone in her eyes. He asked her about the different herbs she cultivated, about their properties and uses. Mesa, surprised by his genuine interest, spoke freely, sharing her knowledge without reservation. They discussed the healing properties of aloe, the calming effects of chamomile, the invigorating scent of mint. Ziad, though raised in a world of palaces and courtiers, found himself drawn to Mesa's simple wisdom, her connection to the earth. He then did something unprecedented. He asked about her dreams, her aspirations. "What do you wish for, Mesa?" he asked, his voice soft, almost intimate. Mesa's eyes widened in surprise. No one had ever asked her that before. Her dreams, like the herbs she cultivated, were hidden, tucked away from the harsh realities of her life. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. I wish to learn more," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "To understand the secrets of the desert, the language of the stars, the wisdom of the ancients." Ziad smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "And what prevents you from pursuing these dreams?" he asked. Mesa looked down at her hands, the scars a stark reminder of her place in the world. My circumstances, my lord," she replied quietly. Ziad placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Circumstances can change, Mesa," he said, his voice filled with a warmth that sent a shiver down her spine. He looked into her eyes, his gaze intense, searching. "Never stop dreaming," he whispered, before turning and walking away, leaving Mesa standing alone in the garden, her heart pounding in her chest, a flicker of hope ignited within her soul. The other women of the harem watched in stunned silence, their jealousy simmering beneath the surface like a hidden fire. The jasmine-scented air of the harem gardens held a new secret. Mesa and Ziad began to meet in hidden corners, beneath the shade of ancient date palms, beside the whispering fountain where the water sang an ancient song. They spoke of many things, of the desert stars, of the healing properties of herbs, of the wisdom found in ancient texts. Ziad, accustomed to the elaborate courtesies of court life, found solace in Mesa's simple words, her unassuming nature. He discovered a sharp mind beneath her quiet demeanor, a deep well of compassion in her heart. Mesa, in turn, found herself drawn to Ziad's thoughtful gaze, his genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams. He listened with an attentiveness she had never experienced before, his questions gentle, his presence calming. She began to share stories of her childhood, of her village nestled amongst the rolling dunes, of her grandmother who taught her the secrets of the desert plants. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ziad noticed a small, faded pouch tied around Mesa's wrist. "What is that?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mesa hesitated, her fingers instinctively tightening around the pouch. It held a handful of dried herbs, a reminder of a painful past. "It is a memento," she replied softly. "A memento?" Ziad prompted, his gaze encouraging. Mesa took a deep breath, then slowly opened the pouch. Inside were a few withered leaves, their scent faint but familiar. "These are the leaves of the desert rose," she explained. "They have special significance for me." Ziad looked at the leaves, then back at Mesa, sensing a story waiting to be told. "Tell me," he said softly. Mesa looked away, her gaze fixed on the distant dunes. "When I was a child," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "a sickness swept through our village. Many children fell ill. My grandmother, she used the desert rose to help them." She trailed off, her voice thick with emotion. Ziad waited patiently, sensing the unspoken pain behind her words. He knew she was holding back, protecting herself from a memory that still held its sting. "It was a difficult time," Mesa continued, her voice trembling slightly. "The desert rose, it saved many lives." She closed her hand around the withered leaves, her knuckles white. Ziad reached out and gently covered her hand with his own. "You are a strong woman, Mesa," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Your scars, they tell a story of courage, of selflessness." Mesa looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She had never thought of her scars as anything but a mark of ugliness, a source of shame. But in Ziyad's gaze, she saw something different, something that resonated deep within her soul. She saw acceptance, respect, even admiration. The setting sun cast long shadows across the garden, enveloping them in a warm embrace. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle whisper of the fountain. Maysa felt a connection with Ziyad, a bond that transcended words, a shared understanding that went beyond the superficialities of the harem. She knew that she was revealing a part of herself that she had kept hidden for so long, a part of herself that she had believed to be ugly and unworthy. But in Ziyad's presence, she felt a sense of safety, a sense of belonging, a sense of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her hidden beauty might finally be seen. The whispers started like the desert wind, soft and subtle at first, then growing stronger, swirling through the harem gardens like a sandstorm. Maysa and Ziyad's stolen moments did not go unnoticed. The other women, accustomed to vying for the Sheikh's attention, watched with growing resentment as he sought out Maysa, bypassing their elaborate displays of beauty and charm. They saw the way he looked at her, the genuine interest in his eyes, the gentle touch of his hand on her arm. They saw the way Maysa's quiet demeanor seemed to soften in his presence, the way her face, usually shadowed with sadness, would light up with a shy smile. It was a connection they had never witnessed before, a connection that transcended the usual power dynamics of the harem. The whispers turned to gossip, the gossip to open speculation. Why would the Sheikh, a man of power and prestige, be interested in a scarred slave, a woman deemed ugly by all? Some speculated that Maysa possessed some sort of magic, a potion or spell that had captivated the Sheikh. Others whispered that she was cunning and manipulative, using her knowledge of herbs to ensnare him. The rumors, fueled by jealousy and insecurity, spread like wildfire through the harem, poisoning the air with suspicion and resentment. Firial, her emerald eyes burning with a venomous rage, watched from the shadows, her hands still bandaged, a constant reminder of her failed attempt to impress the Sheikh. Maysa's growing closeness with Ziyad felt like a personal affront, a challenge to her position as the most desired woman in the harem. She had always taken pride in her beauty, using it as a weapon to manipulate and control those around her. But Ziyad's indifference to her charms, his clear preference for Maysa's quiet intelligence, threatened her sense of self-worth, her carefully constructed image of superiority. She seethed with resentment, her thoughts turning dark and twisted. She couldn't bear the thought of Maysa, a woman she considered beneath her, capturing the Sheikh's heart. She vowed to destroy Maysa, to expose her as a fraud, to reclaim her position as the reigning beauty of the harem. She began to actively plot against Maysa, her mind racing with schemes and strategies, her heart filled with a venomous desire for revenge. She sought out allies among the other jealous women, whispering lies and fueling their resentment. She reminded them of Maysa's scarred face, her humble origins, her quiet demeanor that some mistook for weakness. She painted Maysa as a threat, a cunning manipulator who was using her knowledge of herbs to gain power and influence. She played on their insecurities, their fears of being replaced, their desperate desire for the Sheikh's attention. Slowly but surely, Firial began to turn the other women against Maysa, creating a climate of suspicion and hostility. She isolated Maysa, making her the target of their scorn and ridicule. She watched with a cruel satisfaction as Maysa's shy smile faded, replaced by a look of sadness and confusion. She knew that her plan was working, that she was slowly but surely poisoning Maysa's world, just as she had poisoned the air with the burning plant. The jasmine-scented air of the harem gardens, once a haven of peace and tranquility, now held a new scent, the bitter odor of jealousy and revenge. Virial found Mesa alone in the herb garden, her back turned as she meticulously pruned a rosemary bush. The setting sun cast long shadows, hiding Virial's approach. She moved swiftly, her silken robes rustling like dry leaves in the wind. "You!" Virial hissed, her voice sharp as a viper's strike. Mesa turned, startled, her eyes widening as she saw the fury etched on Virial's face. "You think you can steal him from me?" Virial continued, her voice rising with each word. "You, a scarred, insignificant slave!" Mesa stood her ground, her gaze steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I have stolen nothing," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "Don't lie to me," Virial spat. "I see the way he looks at you. I see the way you flutter your eyelashes and pretend to be so innocent." Mesa's chin lifted. "I have done nothing to deserve your scorn," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The Sheikh is a wise and just man. He sees beyond outward appearances." Virial laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "He sees a novelty, a distraction," she sneered, "a scarred little bird he can keep in a cage for his amusement. But he will never choose you. He will choose a woman of beauty, a woman of power, a woman who can bring him influence and prestige." Virial leaned closer, her eyes blazing with malice. "And let me assure you, Mesa," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom, "I will make sure that day never comes. I will destroy you before I let you have him." She turned and stalked away, leaving Mesa standing alone in the gathering dusk, the scent of rosemary heavy in the air, the weight of Virial's threat pressing down on her like a physical burden. Across the desert, in the Sheikh's tent, Ziad sat surrounded by his council. They had come once again to urge him to choose a wife. They laid before him portraits of princesses, each one more beautiful than the last. They spoke of alliances, of dowries, of the political advantages that each union would bring. Ziad listened patiently, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the brazier, his thoughts far away in the jasmine-scented gardens of the harem. "These women are all beautiful and accomplished, my lord," one of the councillors said, his voice smooth and persuasive. "They would bring honor and prestige to your tribe." Ziad sighed, a weary sound. "Beauty fades," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "And prestige is a fleeting thing. I seek a wife who is more than just a beautiful face, more than just a political pawn." The councillors exchanged uneasy glances. They did not understand the Sheikh's reluctance to choose a bride. They saw it as a sign of weakness, a threat to the stability of his rule. "But my lord," another councillor persisted, "your people expect you to marry. They need a sheikha, a woman who can represent them with grace and dignity." Ziad looked at the portrait spread before him, the painted faces all blurring together in his mind. He saw beauty, yes, but he saw no spark of intelligence, no hint of compassion, no depth of character. He thought of Mesa, of her quiet strength, her gentle wisdom, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of the healing properties of herbs. He thought of the scars on her face, a testament to her courage, her selflessness. He knew that she possessed a beauty that went far deeper than skin deep, a beauty that resonated with his soul, and in that moment he knew, with a certainty that surprised even himself, that Mesa was the woman he wanted by his side, not as a political pawn, but as a true companion, a kindred spirit, a wife. Ziad dismissed his counsel, their words echoing hollowly in his ears. He would not be swayed by their political maneuvering. He would choose his own wife, a woman who resonated with his heart, not one chosen for him by advisors seeking power and alliances. His thoughts drifted to Mesa, her gentle smile, the quiet strength in her eyes. He longed to hear her voice, to share with her the burdens of leadership, the dreams he held for his people. He rose and left the tent, the desert night cool against his skin, his heart drawn towards the jasmine-scented haven of the Harem gardens. He found Mesa by the fountain, the moonlight illuminating her face, highlighting the delicate curve of her jaw, the shadows that danced in her dark eyes. She looked up as he approached, a flicker of surprise, then a shy smile gracing her lips. They spoke for hours that night, the fountain's gentle murmur a soothing backdrop to their conversation. Ziad shared his frustrations with the council, his desire for a simpler life, a life free from the constraints of courtly intrigue. Mesa listened intently, offering words of comfort and wisdom. She spoke of the resilience of desert plants, their ability to thrive in harsh conditions, their deep roots that anchored them to the earth. Ziad found solace in her words, a sense of peace he had not known before. He felt a connection to her, a bond that deepened with each shared word, each stolen glance. He knew with a growing certainty that he was falling in love with this remarkable woman, this scarred slave who possessed a beauty that transcended outward appearances. As Ziad and Mesa found solace in their hidden encounters, Firial's jealousy festered and grew. She watched them from afar, her eyes narrowed, her lips curled into a snarl. The sight of their shared laughter, the gentle touch of Ziad's hand on Mesa's arm, fueled her rage. She felt a burning need to strike back, to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. The Sheikh's attention, the admiration of the harem, her position as the most desirable woman. Consumed by her venomous thoughts, Firial sought out a dark corner of the harem, a place where shadows clung to the walls and secrets whispered in the dust. She met with a woman known for her dealings in forbidden goods, a woman who could procure anything for a price. Firial, her voice low and urgent, described what she needed. A substance that could burn and scar, a substance that could destroy beauty, a substance that could inflict pain. The woman, her eyes glinting with a knowing look, produced a small vial filled with a clear, odorless liquid. She warned Firial of its potency, its ability to disfigure and maim. But Firial, blinded by her rage, her heart hardened by jealousy, dismissed the warnings. She clutched the vial in her hand, her fingers tightening around the smooth glass, her mind already envisioning the look of horror on Mesa's face, the satisfaction she would feel as she watched her rival's beauty crumble into ashes. The acid, she believed, would be her weapon, her instrument of revenge, her final solution to the problem that was Mesa. Firial clutched the vial, her heart pounding a furious rhythm against her ribs. She had waited for the perfect opportunity, a moment when Mesa would be alone, vulnerable. Tonight, she believed, was that night. She had seen Mesa slip away from the other women, heading towards the secluded rose garden at the edge of the harem. It was a place where Mesa often went to be alone, to find solace in the fragrant blossoms. Firial knew this was her chance. She followed Mesa, keeping to the shadows, the vial cold against her palm. She imagined the acid splashing against Mesa's face, the screams of pain, the permanent disfigurement that would follow. She envisioned Mesa's beauty, what little she possessed, dissolving before her eyes, leaving behind only a scarred, grotesque mask. The thought brought a cruel smile to Firial's lips. As she reached the rose garden, she saw Mesa kneeling by a rose bush, her head bowed, her fingers gently tracing the petals of a pale pink rose. Firial took a deep breath, steeling herself for the act she was about to commit. She raised the vial, her hand trembling slightly, ready to unleash its corrosive contents. Suddenly, a voice called out from the other side of the garden, "Mesa! Mesa! Come quickly! Zahara has fallen ill. She needs your help." It was Yasmin, one of the older harem servants. Mesa looked up, startled, then quickly rose to her feet. "I'm coming," she called back, her voice filled with concern. She glanced towards the shadows where Firial stood hidden, a fleeting look of confusion crossing her face. Then, without a backward glance, she hurried away, leaving Firial standing alone in the rose garden, the vial still clutched in her hand, her plan thwarted. Firial cursed under her breath, her fury boiling over. She had been so close to enacting her revenge. She ground her teeth, her knuckles white as she gripped the vial. She would not be deterred. She would find another opportunity, another moment when Mesa would be vulnerable. She would not rest until her revenge was complete. Frustrated and seething, Firial returned to the harem, her mind racing with a new plan. If she couldn't destroy Mesa physically, she would destroy her reputation. She would turn the other women against her, isolate her, make her life a living hell. She began to spread rumors, whispering lies in the ears of the other harem women. She claimed that Mesa had deliberately poisoned Zahara, using her knowledge of herbs for nefarious purposes. She hinted that Mesa was a witch, a sorceress, who used dark magic to manipulate those around her. She played on their fears, their insecurities, their jealousy of Mesa's growing closeness with the Sheikh. "She's dangerous," Firial whispered, her voice laced with false concern. "She's not who she seems. She's using her herbs to control the Sheikh, to gain power and influence." The other women, already predisposed to dislike Mesa, readily believed Firial's lies. They had seen the Sheikh's attention towards Mesa, his disregard for their own charms. They were eager to find a reason to distrust her, to justify their resentment. The rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by jealousy and fear. The atmosphere in the harem shifted, becoming thick with suspicion and hostility. The women who had once tolerated Mesa's presence now shunned her, their whispers following her like shadows. They looked at her with distrust, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. Mesa, unaware of the rumors swirling around her, felt the change in their demeanor, the coldness in their gazes. She felt increasingly isolated, alone in a sea of hostile faces. The once peaceful haven of the harem gardens had become a battleground, and Mesa, unknowingly, had become the target of Firial's venomous campaign. Mesa sought refuge in the harem library, a quiet sanctuary filled with the scent of aged parchment and forgotten stories. The other women rarely ventured here, preferring the lively chatter of the courtyard to the silent wisdom of books. For Mesa, however, the library was a haven, a place where she could lose herself in the words of poets and philosophers, where she could find solace in the knowledge of ancient healers. She wandered through the rows of shelves, her fingers tracing the spines of leather-bound volumes. She felt a strange sense of peace in this quiet room, a sense of connection to the generations of women who had sought refuge here before her. She reached for a dusty tome, its cover worn and faded, its title written in a language she barely recognized. She opened the book, its pages brittle with age, and began to read. The text, written in a script that seemed to flow like water, described the healing properties of desert plants, their hidden powers, their ability to cure even the most stubborn ailments. Mesa became engrossed in the ancient wisdom, her mind absorbing the knowledge like a thirsty sponge. She read of rare herbs, of forgotten remedies, of cures for illnesses she had never heard of. As she turned a page, her eyes fell upon a description of a rare fever, a sickness that swept through the land like a desert wind, leaving death and devastation in its wake. The symptoms, described in meticulous detail, included a burning fever, a persistent cough, and a strange rash that spread across the skin. Mesa read on, her heart quickening as she recognized the symptoms. She had seen them before, not in the harem, but in the faces of the villagers who came to the oasis seeking water and trade. She had noticed the telltale rash, the feverish gleam in their eyes, the labored breaths. She had dismissed it as a common ailment, a minor inconvenience. But now, as she read the ancient text, a chilling realization dawned upon her. The fever was not minor. It was not common. It was the very sickness described in the ancient tome, a sickness that could decimate the entire oasis if left unchecked. A sense of urgency gripped her. She had to do something. She had to warn the Sheikh, to find a way to stop the spread of the fever. The ancient text, thankfully, not only described the symptoms, but also offered a cure, a complex concoction of rare herbs found only in the deepest parts of the desert. Mesa knew that she was the only one who could prepare the cure, the only one who possessed the knowledge to save the oasis from the impending disaster. She closed the book, her mind racing with a mixture of fear and determination. She had to act quickly. Lives depended on it. Mesa knew time was precious. The fever described in the ancient text was swift and merciless. She had to prepare the cure quickly, before the sickness spread further through the oasis. The text listed several rare herbs, some she knew well, others she had only read about in ancient scrolls. Thankfully, the Harem gardens, extensive and diverse, held many rare and exotic plants, remnants of previous Sheikh's fascination with botany. She worked in secret, rising before dawn and staying up late into the night, stealing moments between her regular duties to gather the necessary ingredients. She moved with a quiet urgency, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew she couldn't risk alerting Firial or the other women, who, fueled by jealousy and suspicion, would likely try to sabotage her efforts. She crushed dried leaves, measured precise amounts of roots and bark, and carefully distilled fragrant blossoms, following the instructions in the ancient text with meticulous care. The air in her small workroom, tucked away in a quiet corner of the harem, became thick with the scent of exotic herbs, a mixture of pungent and sweet aromas that swirled around her like a protective shield. As she worked, she realized she needed an ally, someone she could trust, someone who would help her gather the remaining ingredients, someone who would keep her secret safe. She thought of Yasmin, the older servant who had called her away the night Firial had lurked in the rose garden. Yasmin was kind and wise, a woman who had seen much in her long years of service in the harem. She had always shown Mesa a quiet respect, a gentle understanding that set her apart from the other women. Mesa sought Yasmin out, finding her in the kitchen, her hands busy kneading dough for the evening meal. She hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject, how to explain the urgency of the situation without revealing too much. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice low and urgent. "Yasmin," she said, "I need your help." Yasmin looked up, her kind eyes filled with concern. "What is it, child?" she asked. Mesa explained that she was preparing a special medicine, a cure for a sickness that was spreading through the oasis. She described the symptoms she had witnessed, the fever, the cough, the rash. She told Yasmin about the ancient text she had found in the library, the complex recipe for the cure. Yasmin listened intently, her brow furrowed with worry. She knew the desert well, its harsh beauty, its hidden dangers. She had seen sickness sweep through the oasis before, leaving devastation in its wake. She understood the urgency in Mesa's voice, the fear in her eyes. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice firm and resolute. Mesa explained that she needed help gathering the remaining ingredients, rare herbs that grew only in the remote parts of the desert. She knew it was a dangerous task, a journey that would require courage and discretion. Yasmin didn't hesitate. "I will help you," she said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "We will do whatever it takes to protect our people." And so, under the cover of darkness, Mesa and Yasmin began their secret mission, their shared purpose, a bond that forged a deep and abiding friendship. They ventured into the desert, guided by the stars and Mesa's knowledge of the land. They gathered the precious herbs, their hands carefully plucking the leaves and roots, their hearts filled with a shared hope that they could stop the fever before it consumed the oasis. They worked tirelessly, their movements swift and silent, their secret safe within the vast expanse of the desert night. Ziad watched the bustling marketplace with a growing unease. The usual vibrant energy felt subdued, replaced by a subtle undercurrent of anxiety. He noticed more coughs echoing through the crowd, more pale faces amongst the traders. Several merchants had closed their stalls, their wares covered with dust cloths. Even the camels seemed listless, their heads drooping in the midday heat. He had heard whispers of a sickness spreading through the oasis, a persistent fever that lingered for days, leaving its victims weak and vulnerable. At first, he had dismissed it as a seasonal ailment, a minor inconvenience. But now, as he witnessed the growing number of afflicted, a knot of worry tightened in his chest. He returned to his tent, his mind heavy with concern. He summoned his advisors, demanding answers. They confirmed his fears, reporting a significant increase in the number of people falling ill. The physicians, however, seemed baffled by the sickness. They had tried all their usual remedies, but nothing seemed to work. The fever persisted, spreading relentlessly through the oasis. "We need to find a cure," Ziad said, his voice firm, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his advisors. "We cannot allow this sickness to decimate our people." The advisors, their faces etched with worry, offered suggestions, but none seemed viable. They spoke of quarantining the sick, of increasing sanitation efforts, of seeking the advice of healers from neighboring tribes. But Ziad knew these measures, while necessary, would not be enough. They needed a cure, a way to stop the fever before it spiraled out of control. As the days passed, the situation worsened. The fever spread through the oasis like a wildfire, consuming the strong and the weak alike. The marketplace became eerily quiet, the once bustling streets deserted. The air, usually filled with the sounds of laughter and trade, now carried the heavy scent of sickness and fear. Ziad found himself increasingly isolated, burdened by the weight of his responsibilities. His council, ever focused on political maneuvering, urged him to distance himself from the harem, to avoid any risk of infection. They reminded him of his duty to his people, his responsibility to remain healthy and strong. Firial, sensing an opportunity to further her own agenda, seized upon the Sheikh's anxieties. She whispered in his ear, reminding him of Mesa's close proximity to the sick, her constant handling of herbs and medicines. She planted seeds of doubt, suggesting that Mesa might be the source of the sickness, a carrier of the fever. "Be careful, my lord," she would say, her voice laced with false concern. "You must protect yourself. You cannot risk your health for a slave." Ziad, weary and stressed, found himself succumbing to the pressure. He knew logically that Mesa was not to blame, but the constant barrage of warnings, the growing fear of the fever, began to erode his trust. He started to avoid the harem, his visits becoming less frequent, his conversations with Mesa shorter and more strained. He felt a growing distance between them, a chasm created by fear and suspicion, a chasm that threatened to swallow the fragile bond they had so carefully nurtured. He missed her quiet wisdom, her gentle touch, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of the healing power of plants. But fear, like the fever that gripped the oasis, was a powerful force, and it was slowly but surely poisoning his heart, driving him away from the woman he loved. Firial, her emerald eyes gleaming with malicious intent, slithered through the quiet corridors of the harem. She had noticed Mesa's unusual absences, her late nights and early mornings, the faint scent of unfamiliar herbs clinging to her clothes. A burning curiosity, mixed with a venomous suspicion, gnawed at her. She knew Mesa was up to something, and she was determined to uncover her secret. One night, while the other women slept, Firial crept to Mesa's small workroom, a hidden chamber tucked away in a forgotten corner of the harem. She pressed her ear against the door, listening intently. She heard the soft clinking of glass, the gentle rustling of dried leaves, the low murmur of Mesa's voice. Her heart quickened with anticipation. She carefully pushed the door open, peering inside. The room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Mesa, her back turned, stood hunched over a table, her hands busy mixing a variety of herbs and liquids in a large earthenware bowl. The air was thick with the pungent aroma of unfamiliar plants. Firial watched in silence, her eyes narrowed, her mind racing with possibilities. She saw jars filled with dried leaves and roots, bottles filled with colorful tinctures, and stacks of ancient scrolls covered in strange symbols. She recognized some of the herbs, common remedies used for minor ailments. But others were unfamiliar, exotic plants she had never seen before. She realized with a jolt that Mesa was not simply preparing a common remedy. This was something more complex, something more potent. Could it be, she wondered, that Mesa was working on a cure for the fever that was sweeping through the oasis? The thought struck her like a lightning bolt. If Mesa was indeed working on a cure, it would explain her secretive behavior, her late nights and early mornings. It would explain the strange herbs she had been collecting. It would also, Firial realized with a cruel twist of her lips, provide the perfect opportunity to finally destroy her. A wicked plan began to form in Firial's mind. She would sabotage Mesa's efforts, ruin her cure, and then frame her for spreading the disease. She would convince the Sheikh, the other women, the entire oasis that Mesa was not a healer, but a poisoner, a witch who used her knowledge of herbs for nefarious purposes. She slipped back into the shadows, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and malice. She would wait for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to strike. Mesa, she thought, would soon learn that her secret was no longer safe. And when the truth was revealed, it would be Mesa, not Firial, who would face the wrath of the Sheikh and the scorn of the Harem. The fever, she realized, was not just a threat to the oasis. It was a weapon, a tool she could use to finally destroy her rival. The moon hung heavy in the night sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the Harem gardens. Firial, her face pale and determined, crept towards Mesa's workroom, the vial of acid clutched tightly in her hand. She had waited for this moment, a time when Mesa would be alone, vulnerable, her guard down. Tonight, she would finally enact her revenge. She slipped into the workroom, the door creaking softly behind her. Mesa, her back turned, stood hunched over a table, meticulously measuring herbs into a steaming pot. The air was thick with the pungent aroma of boiling roots and leaves. "What are you doing?" Firial hissed, her voice sharp, edged with malice. Mesa whirled around, startled, her eyes wide with surprise. She saw Firial standing in the doorway, her face contorted with rage, the vial glinting ominously in her hand. Mesa instantly understood. This was not a friendly visit. This was an attack. "Firial," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what do you want?" "What do I want?" Firial laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "I want you gone. I want you out of the Sheikh's life, out of this harem, out of my sight." Mesa stood her ground, her gaze steady despite the fear that pulsed through her veins. "I have done nothing to harm you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Lies!" Firial shrieked. "You've bewitched him with your herbs, your potions. You've poisoned his mind against me." "That's not true," Mesa pleaded, her hands outstretched in a gesture of peace. "I only wish to help, to heal." Firial's eyes narrowed, her lips curled into a snarl. "You think you can fool me?" she spat. "I know what you're really doing. You're spreading this fever, this sickness to gain power, to manipulate the Sheikh." "No!" Mesa cried, her voice rising in desperation. "I'm trying to cure it. I found a remedy in an ancient text. I'm preparing it now." "Lies!" Firial repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "I'll put an end to your wicked schemes." She lunged forward, the vial raised, ready to splash its corrosive contents onto Mesa's face. But Mesa, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, reacted instinctively. She stepped aside, just as Firial lunged, and reached out, grabbing Firial's wrist. They struggled, their bodies intertwined, the vial precariously balanced between them. Firial screamed, her grip loosening, her fingers slipping. The vial tipped, its contents spilling onto Firial's outstretched hand. A shriek of pain echoed through the small room. Firial stumbled back, her hand clutched to her chest, her face contorted in agony. The acid, meant for Mesa's face, had burned its way into Firial's own flesh. Mesa watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never wished harm on Firial, despite the constant cruelty, the relentless persecution. She reached out a hand, wanting to help, but Firial recoiled, her eyes blazing with hatred. You did this," she gasped, her voice choked with pain and rage. Mesa shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, Firial," she said, her voice trembling. "It was an accident. You did it to yourself." The other women, awakened by Firial's screams, began to gather outside the workroom, their faces etched with fear and confusion. They pushed the door open, their gazes falling on Firial, her hand blistered and raw, her face twisted in pain. They saw the vial lying on the floor, its contents spilled, the pungent odor of acid filling the air. Then they saw Mesa, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with tears. In that moment, the truth, like the acid that had burned Firial's hand, became searingly clear. Firial's wicked plot had been exposed. The harem was in chaos. Firial's screams had awakened everyone. The women clustered around her, some offering words of comfort, others staring in horrified fascination at her burned hand. Yasmin, her face etched with worry, gently examined the wound, her experienced hands working quickly to soothe the burning flesh. Mesa stood apart from the crowd, her heart heavy with a mixture of guilt and relief. She hadn't wished this on Firial, but the truth was out. Firial's cruelty, her venomous plot, had been exposed. As Yasmin tended to Firial's burns, she noticed the vial lying on the floor, its contents spilled, the pungent odor of acid still lingering in the air. She recognized the vial instantly. She had seen it before, hidden amongst Firial's belongings. She knew what it contained, its corrosive power, its ability to disfigure and maim. She looked at Firial, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She knew with a heavy heart what had transpired in this small room. "Firial," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "How did this happen?" Firial, her face contorted in pain, glared at Mesa. She did this to me," she hissed, her voice choked with rage. "She attacked me." Yasmin looked at Mesa, her eyes searching for the truth. Mesa shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Yasmin," she sobbed. "It was an accident. She tried to—" She couldn't bring herself to say the words, to reveal the full extent of Firial's cruelty. Yasmin, however, understood. She had seen the darkness in Firial's heart, the jealousy that consumed her, the lengths she would go to achieve her desires. "Enough," Yasmin said, her voice filled with authority. She turned to the other women, her gaze sweeping across their faces. "This was no accident," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Firial intended to harm Mesa. She brought this upon herself." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mixture of shock and disbelief. They had witnessed Firial's constant cruelty towards Mesa, her relentless taunts and accusations, but they had never imagined she would go this far. Yasmin turned back to Mesa, her eyes filled with compassion. "Child," she said, her voice softening, "it's time the truth was known. Tell them about your scars. Tell them how you got them." Mesa hesitated, her fingers instinctively touching the pockmarks on her face. She had always kept the story of her scars hidden, a secret she guarded fiercely, But now, in the face of Firial's accusations, she knew she had to speak. She took a deep breath and began to tell her story, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as she spoke. She told them about her childhood in a small village, about the smallpox epidemic that had swept through the community, claiming the lives of many children. She told them how her grandmother, a skilled healer, had used all her knowledge to fight the disease, to save as many lives as she could. She told them how she, a young girl at the time, had helped her grandmother, tending to the sick, comforting the dying, despite the risk of infection. She told them how she had contracted the disease herself, her young body ravaged by the fever, her face scarred forever. "My scars," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength, "are not a mark of ugliness. They are a reminder of the lives I helped to save, a testament to the courage and compassion of my grandmother." As Mesa spoke, Ziad entered the workroom, drawn by the commotion. He had heard the screams, the hushed whispers, the rumors of an attack. He stood in the doorway, unseen, unheard, as Mesa told her story. He listened, his heart aching with a mixture of admiration and regret. He had been so blinded by the fear of the fever, so swayed by Firial's manipulations, that he had failed to see the true beauty of the woman he loved. He had doubted her, questioned her motives, allowed himself to be swayed by the whispers of others. He now saw Mesa with new eyes, her scars not a mark of ugliness, but a symbol of her courage, her selflessness, her unwavering commitment to helping others. He realized, with a profound sense of shame, that he had been wrong about her, wrong about everything. He had been searching for beauty in the wrong places, blinded by the superficiality of the harem, while true beauty, true strength, had been right in front of him all along. He knew in that moment that he had to make amends, to show Mesa how much he valued her, how deeply he admired her. He would not let fear or the manipulations of others drive them apart again. He would stand by her side, protect her, cherish her for the remarkable woman she was. Mesa worked tirelessly, guided by the ancient text and aided by Yasmin's unwavering support. She brewed the potent medicine, a complex blend of desert herbs, carefully monitoring the simmering concoction, adjusting the flames, her brow furrowed in concentration. The scent of the brewing cure, a mixture of earthy and sweet aromas, filled the small workroom, a beacon of hope in the midst of fear and despair. With Yasmin's help, Mesa began to administer the cure, starting with those most severely afflicted. She moved through the oasis, her hands gentle, her voice soothing, offering comfort and hope to the sick and suffering. She worked day and night, her own exhaustion forgotten in the face of the growing crisis. Slowly, miraculously, the cure began to work. Fevers subsided, coughs eased, and the telltale rash began to fade. Strength returned to weakened limbs, and hope flickered in eyes that had been dimmed by despair. Word of Mesa's healing touch spread through the oasis like a desert wind, carrying with it a wave of relief and gratitude. People flocked to her, their faces etched with hope, their voices filled with prayers of thanks. They called her a savior, an angel sent from the heavens. Mesa, humbled by their praise, simply smiled and continued her work, her heart filled with a quiet satisfaction. Ziad, having overheard Mesa's story, watched from afar, his heart swelling with pride and admiration. He had been so wrong about her, so blinded by the superficiality of the harem. He now saw her true beauty, the beauty of her courage, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to helping others. He called a public gathering in the marketplace, the first since the fever had taken hold. The people assembled, their faces still pale, their bodies weakened, but their eyes filled with a newfound hope. Ziad stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. My people, he began, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, we have faced a great challenge, a sickness that has threatened to destroy us. But we have also witnessed a great miracle, the healing power of knowledge, compassion, and courage. He turned to Mesa, who stood beside Yasmin, her face flushed with humility. This woman, he said, his voice filled with emotion, Mesa has saved us. She has used her knowledge, her wisdom, her unwavering dedication to heal our people, to restore hope to our oasis. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the harem women who stood apart from the crowd, their faces etched with a mixture of shame and awe. For too long, he continued, his voice rising with conviction, we have been blinded by superficial beauty, by outward appearances. We have valued adornments and titles above true worth, above inner strength. We have allowed jealousy and pettiness to poison our hearts, to divide us. He looked directly at Firial, her hand still bandaged, her face pale and drawn. There are those among us, he said, his voice hardening, who have sought to destroy beauty, to inflict pain and suffering on others. Their actions have been exposed, their cruelty revealed. He turned back to Mesa, his eyes filled with love and admiration. Mesa, he said, his voice soft but firm, you are the true beauty of this harem. Your scars are not a mark of ugliness, but a testament to your courage, your selflessness, your unwavering commitment to helping others. You are the woman I want by my side, not as a slave, but as my equal, my partner, my wife. A hush fell over the marketplace as Ziad's words echoed through the assembled crowd. Mesa, her heart pounding in her chest, looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise and a dawning joy. She had never dared to dream of such a future where she would be valued not for her appearance, but for her heart, her mind, her spirit. Mesa, Ziad repeated, his voice gentle but firm, will you be my wife? Tears welled in Mesa's eyes, tears of happiness, of gratitude, of a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of places. Yes, my lord, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I will. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a wave of joy that washed over the marketplace, dispelling the lingering shadows of fear and despair. Ziad took Mesa's hand, his touch warm and reassuring, and led her to the center of the marketplace. He raised their joined hands, a symbol of their union, a testament to their love. Virial, her face pale and contorted with rage, watched from the sidelines, her burned hand throbbing with pain. Her plot had backfired, her cruelty exposed. Ziad, his gaze cold and unforgiving, turned to her. Virial, he said, his voice sharp as a blade, your actions have brought shame upon your family, upon this oasis. You are banished. Return to your father's tent, and never set foot in my lands again. Firial, her pride shattered, her dreams in ruins, turned and fled, her sobs echoing through the silent marketplace. The other women of the harem, their faces etched with a mixture of shame and relief, watched her go, their hearts filled with a newfound understanding of the true meaning of beauty. Mesa, now Sheikh Mesa, became a beloved figure in the oasis. She established a school of herbal medicine in the harem, teaching the other women the healing properties of plants, sharing her knowledge and wisdom with generosity and grace. The harem, once a place of rivalry and intrigue, transformed into a center of learning and mutual support, where inner virtues were valued above outward appearances. The women, inspired by Mesa's example, began to cultivate their own inner gardens, their hearts blossoming with compassion and kindness. Mesa and Ziad ruled wisely and justly, their love a beacon of hope for the oasis. They worked together, side by side, to improve the lives of their people, to promote justice and equality, to foster a spirit of unity and understanding. They faced many challenges, many trials, but their love, like the deep roots of desert plants, anchored them to each other, to their shared purpose, to the land they both cherished. As the sun set on their wedding day, painting the desert sky in hues of orange and purple, Mesa and Ziad stood embraced on a high dune, overlooking the oasis. The wind whispered through the palm trees, carrying the scent of jasmine and the distant sounds of celebration. They looked towards the future, their hands clasped tightly together, their hearts filled with love and purpose, their eyes shining with the promise of a long and happy life together.